1923. The air over the plains of Mesopotamia is not air. It is a physical weight, a shimmering, granular blanket of heat and dust that clogs the lungs and grinds in the teeth. This is the dig site of a wound in the earth tended by the British Museum. And for the men of Professor Alastair Finch's expedition, it is a place of grand conquest. They are wresting history from the soil, seeking the seals of kings and the inventories of empires. Their tools are the trowel, the brush, and the confident, booming voices that echo across the trenches, assigning meaning to every shard of pottery and fragment of stone. And then there is Dr. Eleanor Vance. Her tool is a graphite pencil. Her voice is almost never heard. She was hired not for her doctorate in ancient architecture from Somerville College, Oxford, a credential politely ignored, but for her steady hand. She is the expedition's artist, its draftswoman, a human camera sent to merely document, not to think. Her role, as Finch so often reminded her with a paternalistic smile, was to produce faithful renderings for the museum archives back in London, to illustrate the discoveries of great men. But as her pencil moves, tracing the incised wedges of cuneiform on a sun-baked clay tablet, Eleanor sees something the men do not. Her pencil meticulously traces cuneiform on a clay tablet, and her mind moves beyond the simple act of replication. The men see inventory, a list of grain sacks, a tally of livestock, the mundane bureaucracy of a dead city. They categorize, label, and move on. Eleanor, however, is tasked with drawing the tablets in the precise location they were found. Day after day, week after week under the relentless sun, she sketches not just the objects, but their context. And in that context, a terrifying, brilliant pattern begins to emerge. The tablets aren't scattered randomly, as they would be in a simple collapsed storeroom. They are clustered. Here, a dense pocket of tablets all bearing astronomical notations. 20 feet away, another group, all detailing legal codes. Over there, by what looks like a collapsed portico, a concentration of epic poetry. It's not chaos. It's an organizational system. It's a catalog. She lifts her gaze from her drawing board, squinting at the broader excavation. The men see a warren of crumbling mud brick walls, the foundations of just another administrative complex. But Eleanor, with her architect's eye, sees something else entirely. The walls in this section are abnormally thick. The standard sun-dried brick is interspersed with layers of much darker, harder brick, an expensive, labor-intensive process. Why? For a grain store? Unlikely. But for a repository of knowledge designed to protect its invaluable contents from fire? It was a known technique, a lesson learned from 1,000 years of cities burning. She notices the floor plan taking shape as the local laborers clear more earth. It isn't a maze of small offices. It's a series of long interconnected halls, flanked by hundreds of regularly spaced, man-sized alcoves. They aren't living quarters. They are shelves. They are the skeletal remains of a library, a vast, deliberate, monumental library. She feels a tremor of discovery so profound it almost frightens her. This isn't just a city. This was an intellectual center, a university of clay, a repository of knowledge on a scale they had not yet imagined for this era. That evening, in the flickering lantern light of the main tent, she unrolls her schematics before Professor Finch. She tries to explain, her voice quiet but firm. She points to the tablet clusters, the fireproofed walls, the alcove patterns. Professor, she begins, the spatial distribution is non-random. The architecture is protective, not merely structural. This wasn't a tax office. I believe it was a great library. Finch picks up one of her drawings, a beautiful, precise rendering of a wall section. He holds it up to the light, admiring the cross-hatching, the clean lines. He smiles, the very picture of condescending approval. An excellent rendering, Miss Vance. Truly, your artistic sensibilities are a great asset to us. He places the drawing down, patting her hand. But interpretation, my dear, is best left to the archaeologists. We must not let our imaginations run away with us. He saw her evidence as art. He saw her analysis as fantasy. The world was on the cusp of a discovery that could reshape its understanding of the dawn of civilization, and the only person who could see it was the one person they had paid specifically not to look. The truth was there, inked on her parchment, but the official history was being written in a different tint, by a man who had already made up his mind. Who would listen to a woman whose role was to merely history, not interpret it? Following that initial, almost instinctual insight, the dismissal in the lamplit tent did not deter Eleanor Vance. It focused her. If her words were ignored, her drawings would have to speak for themselves, becoming not just illustrations, but instruments of irrefutable proof. Her work from that point on, documented in the now brittle field notebooks of the 1924 season and housed today in the quiet, climate-controlled archives of the Bodleian Library at Oxford, is a masterclass in silent, subversive scholarship. To flip through these pages is to witness a mind building a case, brick by painstaking brick, against the fortress of established dogma. The official expedition reports penned by Finch speak of significant administrative archives. Vance's notebooks tell a different story, a story of a living, breathing center of learning. They are filled with what he would later call artistic over-imagination, but what we can now clearly see as rigorous, multidisciplinary analysis. Her sketches were no longer just reproductions, they became comparative analyses. Her sketches weren't just reproductions, they were comparative analyses, a language the men of the expedition refused to learn. On one page, she draws a cross-section of a typical Mesopotamian grain silo, with its thin, sun-dried brick walls and wide, easily accessible entrance. On the facing page, she draws a cross-section of the structure she was excavating. The contrast is stark, a visual indictment of Finch's theory. The walls here are nearly 3 times as thick, with the meticulously documented layers of fired brick. She annotates it with calculations of load-bearing capacity and thermal resistance, notes that have nothing to do with art and everything to do with engineering. She writes in the margins, "This was not the work of an artist, it was the work of an architectural historian." She went further. She created what might be one of the first examples of archaeological data visualization. She took her small individual sketches of where each tablet was found and plotted them on a large master grid of the entire site. The patterns were undeniable. The legal texts were clustered around what she identified as a central reading room. The astronomical and mathematical tablets were found in an adjoining wing with what appeared to be a partially collapsed light well, an opening in the roof designed to allow for celestial observation. She even identified a scriptorium, a section containing hundreds of unbaked, seemingly blank clay tablets along siluses, as if a class had been interrupted mid-lesson. Her most brilliant deduction came from small, uniquely marked tablets found at the end of each row of alcoves. Finch's team had logged them as unidentified ownership seals. Vance argued they were something far more sophisticated. In her notes, she sketches them side by side, revealing how the primary glyph on each corresponded to the subject matter of the tablets in that row. A star for astronomy, a scale for law, a stylized reed for poetry. It was a cataloging system, a precursor to the card catalogs of her own time, a cuneiform Dewey Decimal System. Armed with this mountain of visual and spatial evidence, she made one final attempt. She presented her master grid and comparative drawings to Finch and the senior staff. The reaction was worse than dismissal. It was amusement. Her data-driven map was treated as a pretty pattern. Her architectural analysis was seen as a charming diversion. The expedition's final report was published in 1925 by the Royal Asiatic Society. It is a dense, authoritative volume that cemented Professor Alastair Finch's reputation. In it, he describes the site as a major palatial administrative center, its contents being the bureaucratic records of the city's commercial life. Dr. Eleanor Vance's contributions are relegated to a single cursory acknowledgement in the preface. Our thanks to Miss E. Vance for her skilled hand in providing the volume's illustrations. Her name, her title, her entire intellectual contribution erased. Her detailed schematics were published, but stripped of her analytical notes presented merely as aesthetically pleasing maps of a ruin. The system had not just ignored her, it had absorbed her labor, repurposed her evidence to support a false conclusion, and rendered her invisible. How could such irrefutable evidence, documented with such precision, be so willfully ignored? Building on those dismissed observations, the answer to how such evidence could be ignored lay not in the data, but in the prejudice of the era. For nearly 50 years, Eleanor Vance's notebooks gathered dust in the Bodleian archives, a silent testament to a truth the world was not yet ready to hear. Professor Finch's interpretation of an administrative center became textbook fact, a foundational stone in the edifice of Mesopotamian history. Generations of students learned it, scholars cited it, and the true nature of the site remained buried a second time, not under sand and earth, but under the suffocating weight of academic consensus. The story would have ended there, a quiet tragedy of a brilliant mind silenced, had it not been for the hum of a mainframe computer in a basement lab at the University of Cambridge in 1978. A new generation of scholars, armed with a revolutionary new discipline called computational archaeology, was beginning to ask questions that couldn't be answered with just a trowel and a brush. A young postdoctoral researcher named Dr. Eris Thorne, who happened to be a woman, was studying the limitations of early 20th century excavation techniques. While reviewing the original expedition files, she grew puzzled by a discrepancy. The official report by Finch described a chaotic administrative archive, yet the illustrations, credited to an E. Vance, were so precise, so meticulously detailed, they seemed to hint at an underlying order. Intrigued, Thorne pulled Vance's original field notes from the archives. As she unspooled the fragile rolls of parchment, she wasn't just looking at drawings, she was looking at raw data, perfectly preserved for half a century. She saw the master grid, the tablet location plots, the architectural cross-sections. She realized that Vance hadn't just been drawing what she saw. She had been creating a data set, a spatial database waiting for the technology to properly analyze it. Thorne and her team spent the next 6 months painstakingly digitizing every single data point from Vance's notebooks, every tablet location, every wall thickness, every catalog marker. They fed this 50-year-old hand-drawn data into a state-of-the-art spatial analysis program. The result, spooling out from the dot matrix printer, was a moment of pure, unadulterated vindication. Modern scholars, applying advanced spatial analysis, confirmed her radical conclusion. The computer, free from the gender biases and preconceived notions of 1920s academia, processed the patterns with cold, impartial logic. It confirmed the non-random clustering of tablets with a statistical certainty of 99.9%. It cross-referenced the architectural data with a database of known ancient structures and concluded the design was overwhelmingly consistent with a large-scale, fire-resistant archive, a library. The program generated a 3D wireframe model of the site's most likely original structure. What appeared on the glowing green and black monitor was not a warren of offices. It was a grand hall with wings dedicated to specific subjects, complete with shelving, a scriptorium, and a central reading room. It was, almost line for line, the very structure Eleanor Vance had sketched in the Mesopotamian dust 50 years earlier. The findings, published in the journal in 1979, sent a shockwave through the field. The Administrative Center was officially redesignated the Great Library of pushing back the timeline for such monumental centers of learning by centuries. It forced a reevaluation of dozens of other sites across the Near East that had been summarily dismissed as archives. It revealed that this ancient civilization was far more intellectually organized and committed to the preservation of knowledge than previously understood. But this triumph was shadowed by a profound and unsettling question. The vindication of Eleanor Vance was also an indictment of the system that silenced her. It wasn't just that a single woman was denied credit, it's that human knowledge itself was held back. For 50 years, an entire field of study proceeded down a wrong path because the person with the right answer was the wrong gender. The questions that could have been asked, the connections that could have been made, the other libraries that could have been found, all lost in a half-century of willful ignorance. What untold stories, what profound understanding of our past did we lose because a woman's brilliant interpretation was deemed secondary to a man's unchallenged authority? History is not just what happened, it is what we choose to remember.